At its peak, Alfred Herbert Ltd was the largest machine tool manufacturer in Europe. Its capstan lathes cut the steel for artillery shells in 2 world wars. Its sales network stretched across 5 continents. The Edgwick Works in Coventry covered 23 acres of foundries and machine halls that never stopped running. Then, in less than a single generation, it was all gone. The British government poured in millions to keep the company alive. It wasn't enough. The wrecking crews tore down every building on the site and replaced it with a retail park. This is the story of the man who built an empire on precision and the company that couldn't survive without him. You're watching Trade Archive. If the stories behind the machines matter to you, subscribe now and leave a like so the next one finds you. Alfred Edward Herbert was born on the 5th of September, 1866, in Leicester, England. His father, William Herbert, was a prosperous man. Not gentry, but comfortable. He farmed 322 acres at Whetstone, south of Leicester, employed 13 men and 7 boys, and owned a townhouse on Regent Street. The family assumed their second son would attend Oxford and enter the church. Alfred had the grades for it. He excelled at English, science, and divinity at Stonygate School. But Alfred wasn't thinking about sermons. He was thinking about lathes. An old school friend named William Sammons Hubbard was working at Joseph Jessup & Sons, a crane-building firm in Leicester, and Alfred watched him operate a small metal-turning lathe. The way the tool met the spinning workpiece, the clean curl of swarf peeling off iron. That was the moment. He told his father he wanted to be an engineer, not a clergyman. His father, to his credit, agreed. Herbert served his apprenticeship at Jessup's through the mid-1880s. It was foundational work. He learned to read castings, to feel tolerances by hand, to understand what separated good iron from bad. By the time he finished, he could walk a foundry floor and tell you which castings would hold up under cutting loads and which would crack. That instinct would define everything that came after. In 1887, at 21 years old, he left Leicester for Coventry to take a job as works manager at Coles & Matthews, a struggling engineering and repair shop in an area called the Butts. The firm made small boilers and agricultural tackle and barely kept its doors open. Herbert's elder brother, William Henry, was already connected to Coventry's cycle trade through the Premier Cycle Company, and he helped arrange the position. The following year, when the owner Matthews retired, Alfred saw his opening. He and Hubbard, his old school friend from Leicester, bought the business for £2,375. Each man's father put up £2,000 in capital. The partnership traded as Herbert and Hubbard, and in the beginning it had nothing to do with machine tools. They built boilers, plowing tackle, steam engines, and whatever else walked through the door. One of their early commissions was a pill sorting machine. What changed everything was Coventry's bicycle boom. By the late 1880s and into the 1890s, the city was the center of British cycle manufacturing, and every workshop needed precision tools to build frames, wheels, and components at speed. Herbert secured the agency for a French patent related to weldless steel tube production, a process critical to making bicycle frames lighter and stronger. The connection came through his brother William Henry, who introduced Alfred to a Paris-based tube manufacturer. The economic historian Roderick Floud later observed that the firm entered machine tool production almost by accident, pivoting on the profits from that single patent. Herbert and Hubbard began building polishing lathes, drilling machines, rim-bending machines, and spoke screwing machines tailored specifically for the cycle trade. In 1894, Hubbard decided to return to Leicester. Herbert bought him out, and the business was formally incorporated as Alfred Herbert Ltd. His brother William Henry became chairman, and Alfred took the title of managing director. He was 28 years old and running his own machine tool company in a city that couldn't build bicycles fast enough. Growth came fast. The bicycle trade gave way to motorcycles, and motorcycles gave way to motor cars, and every transition fed more demand into Herbert's order books. The workforce rose from 180 in 1897 to 1,400 by 1908. By 1914, it exceeded 2,000. When William Henry died in 1910, Alfred assumed the chairmanship as well. He now held total control of the company, and he would not share it with anyone for the rest of his life. But Alfred Herbert was not just building machines. He was building something more unusual, a distribution empire. This is the detail that separates the Herbert story from every other British machine tool manufacturer of the era. Herbert ran what the trade called a factoring operation alongside his manufacturing business. His factories in Coventry produced standardized, general-purpose machine tools, capstan lathes, turret lathes, milling machines, drilling machines, the kind of equipment every metalworking shop needed in volume, and the kind that justified long production runs at Edgwick. However, British industry also required highly specialized, single-purpose machines that only made economic sense in small batches. Rather than invest in developing those machines himself, Herbert imported them. He secured exclusive distribution agreements with major American and German manufacturers and sold their specialist tools through his own global sales network. Between 1919 and 1937, factoring accounted for roughly 40% of the company's total sales. Herbert became the exclusive UK distributor for Norton grinding wheels and handled agencies for dozens of other foreign brands. A British factory owner could walk into a Herbert sales office and order everything needed to equip an entire production line. Herbert's own capstan lathes, imported grinders, shapers, boring machines, all from one supplier. It was a complete service. By 1922, the company had opened its own office in Buenos Aires. Branch offices and agencies stretched across India, Australia, Japan, New Zealand, and Canada. It was brilliant strategy. It was also, as the economic historians Roger Lloyd-Jones and M.J. Lewis later argued in their definitive 2006 study of the company, a slow-acting poison. By building a business that profited from importing foreign innovation rather than developing it in-house, Herbert had created a company structurally dependent on free trade and on the continued goodwill of the very firms that would one day become its competitors. The factoring model made Herbert rich. It also meant that when those foreign firms stopped needing a British distributor and started competing directly, Herbert had no advanced technology of its own to fall back on. Herbert's personal life, meanwhile, had taken a turn that would have been deeply scandalous in Edwardian England. He had married Ellen Adela Riley in 1889, the daughter of a Coventry bank manager, and they had 4 daughters. But the marriage deteriorated over more than 2 decades, and in 1913, their divorce was finalized. Divorce was rare in that era, socially ruinous for most people. For a prominent industrialist and public figure, it was almost unheard of. The scandal was compounded by the fact that in the same year the divorce was granted, Herbert married Florence Lucas, a widow who had been a matron at the Coventry and Warwickshire Hospital, where Herbert served as chairman of the board. He had dissolved a 24-year marriage and married a hospital matron in a single calendar year. Coventry talked. Herbert carried on regardless. When the First World War broke out, Herbert's expertise became a matter of national survival. Machine tools were the bottleneck of armaments production. You could not manufacture artillery shells, rifle barrels, or aircraft components without them, and Britain needed them at a scale nobody had anticipated. In 1915, the Ministry of Munitions appointed Herbert as Deputy Director General and later Controller of Machine Tools, putting him in charge of marshalling the entire British machine tool industry's output for the war effort. He was created a Knight Commander of the Order of the British Empire in 1917 for this service. He also received the French Legion d'Honneur and the Belgian Order of Leopold. Back at the Edgwick Works, the factory had consolidated into a massive complex on a roughly 23-acre site northeast of Coventry city centre, bounded by Cross Road, the Coventry Canal, Stony Stanton Road, and Foles Hill Road. 3 iron foundries, pattern shops, machine halls lined with rows of lathes and drilling machines, erecting bays where finished machines were assembled and tested, administrative offices, a laboratory. The physical scale of the place was matched by Herbert's approach to running it. He walked the shop floor at all hours, including night shifts. According to factory lore, defective castings were sometimes smashed in front of workers publicly to enforce a culture of zero tolerance for poor quality. Herbert tools were to be, in his own framing, works of art. He implemented a piecework bonus system that rewarded collective efficiency and could substantially increase a man's weekly wage. He funded company sports clubs, social societies, and safety programs. He provided support for sick or struggling workers. In December 1926, the company launched the Alfred Herbert News, a monthly staff magazine distributed free to every employee. It celebrated worker achievements, documented company sports results, and promoted what people inside the company called the Herbert spirit. But Herbert's generosity came with a condition that no one was allowed to question. He was fiercely anti-union. New employees signed agreements stipulating they would not join a trade society or participate in any strike. During the volatile labor climate of the 1920s and around the 1926 general strike, Herbert cracked down on organizing. Workers who wanted to unionize did so in secret at the risk of immediate dismissal. It was paternalism with an iron fist inside the velvet glove. He took care of his people. He would not, under any circumstances, let them take care of themselves. This arrangement persisted for the entirety of Herbert's life. Unions were not officially recognized inside Alfred Herbert Ltd. Until after his death. The interwar years produced two of the company's most distinctive products, neither of which was a lathe. The first was the Coventry self-opening die head, a threading tool that had been in experimental development since 1901 and reached its definitive Style C form around 1907. Threading is one of the most fundamental operations in metalworking. Every bolt, every pipe fitting, every threaded component requires it. The die head automated external thread cutting with a precision and repeatability that made it an industry standard across the world. Machine shops from Birmingham to Buenos Aires relied on it. The Coventry die head remains in production today, under different ownership. The second was the attriter, a coal pulverizing machine developed in 1927. The attriter's origin is often attributed in company histories to an unnamed relative or cousin of Sir Alfred. The actual inventor was Charles Edward Blythe, Herbert's brother-in-law, who had married Alfred's sister Fanny in 1901. Blythe ran cement works and needed a machine that could dry and pulverize lump coal, then blow the resulting powder directly into rotary kiln combustion chambers at precisely controlled rates. Nobody made one. So he brought the problem to Alfred's engineers at Edgwick. They built the attritor using high-chrome iron castings, tough enough to withstand the relentless abrasion of coal dust grinding against metal at high speed. What started as a family favor became a global product line used in cement works, power stations, and mineral processing plants across 5 continents. The attritor division would outlast the company that built it. By 1928, the whole firm had consolidated at Edgwick. Profits. In the 1930s ran at approximately £600,000 a year. Herbert received the honorary Freedom of Coventry in 1933. Florence Herbert had died in 1930. In her memory, Alfred commissioned Lady Herbert's Garden, a public garden and almshouse complex built around the surviving remnants of Coventry's medieval city walls. He hired his cousin, the Leicester architect Albert Herbert, to design it. The East Garden opened in April 1931, and the almshouses for elderly Coventry women were completed between 1935 and 1937. The ornamental bronze railings and gates carry Florence's initials. In 1938, Herbert donated £100,000 to the Coventry City Council for the construction of an art gallery and museum. Construction began the following year and stopped when the war broke out. The Second World War tested the company and its city to the breaking point. Alfred Herbert Ltd. was one of the primary manufacturers of the capstan lathes that kept British armament production running, and that made it a target. As men were drafted into the armed forces, the company recruited large numbers of women for war work, putting them on heavy grinding machines, lathes, and assembly lines. Herbert, in his mid-70s, was a vocal critic of employers who resisted hiring women, and he transformed his own factory floors to prove the skeptics wrong. King George VI and Queen Elizabeth visited the works in August 1940. Then, on the night of the 14th of November 1940, the Luftwaffe devastated Coventry in one of the most concentrated bombing raids of the entire war. Over 500 people were killed. Tens of thousands were made homeless. The medieval cathedral was gutted. Factories across the city were hit. Herbert's own almshouses at Lady Herbert's Garden were damaged. According to family accounts, Herbert had been persuaded to shelter that night with his granddaughter in Leamington Spa. He watched the sky burn from a window, pacing in distress, repeating, "My poor men, my poor men." The Edgwick Works were damaged, but not destroyed. Workers returned to the surviving bays. Production resumed under wartime conditions that pushed men and machines to the limit, round the clock, with improvised repairs and substitute materials. Herbert donated £20,000 toward rebuilding the Coventry and Warwickshire Hospital. In March 1944, Alfred Herbert Ltd. became a public company listed on the London Stock Exchange. Herbert was 77 years old. After the war, the company introduced the product line that cemented its reputation among machinists worldwide. The pre-optive headstock was a capstan lathe innovation that allowed the operator to pre-select the next spindle speed while the current cut was still running, then engage it instantly through a friction clutch. Anyone who has stood at a manually geared lathe and lost 30 seconds every time a speed change was needed understands what that meant for production throughput on a multi-operation job. Select the speed, pull the lever. The new speed engages without stopping the spindle. The pre-optive mechanism was applied across the company's flagship range, including the No. 4 Senior and the No. 7 combination turret lathes, heavy machines built for large bar work, and chuck work in automotive, naval, and aerospace applications. The No. 2D capstan lathe, an older design that Herbert had refined relentlessly across decades, remained the backbone of the product line. 16 speeds, 50 to 2550 RPM. Built like a bridge. The 2D was the machine British manufacturing ran on. Thousands were built, and surviving examples from the 1950s are still turning metal in workshops today. Among vintage machinists, a Herbert 2D in good condition is not a museum piece. It is a working tool. Herbert never retired. On his 90th birthday in 1956, his workers collected funds to build the Alfred Herbert Ward at the Coventry and Warwickshire Hospital. He distributed roughly £25,000 among his employees. The Machine Tool Trades Association, of which he was president, established a traveling scholarship in his name. Sir Alfred Herbert died on the 26th of May, 1957, at Hurstbourne Priors in Hampshire. He was 90 years old. More than 2,000 people attended his memorial service in the shell of the bombed Coventry Cathedral. Trade unions were recognized inside his company within months of his passing. He had held that line for nearly 70 years. The Herbert Art Gallery and Museum opened on the 9th of March, 1960. His widow performed the ceremony. Herbert had laid the foundation stone in May 1954 and donated another £100,000 to guarantee its completion. He never saw the finished building. Today, the museum still bears his name and draws hundreds of thousands of visitors annually. But the company Alfred Herbert built did not survive the world he left behind. The leadership that replaced him was cautious, conservative, and unprepared for what was coming. Herbert had run the company with autocratic personal oversight for nearly 7 decades. The succeeding board of directors were competent engineers, but they were not Alfred Herbert. They did not have his instinct for where the market was moving, and they did not have his willingness to bet the company on a decision. The firm acquired the Holbrook Machine Tool Company around 1960. In 1966, it merged with BSA's machine tool division, absorbing the prestigious Churchill Machine Tool Company. In 1967, the American firm Ingersoll Milling Machine Company took a 49% stake, forming Herbert Ingersoll and building a purpose-designed, numerically controlled factory at Daventry. On paper, the company was modernizing. The Daventry plant was everything Edgwick was not. New, purpose-built, equipped for the age of numerical control. In practice, the company was falling behind. The revolution in machine tools was numerical control, and then computer numerical control. American firms had pioneered it. German companies like Gildemeister and Traub were commercializing it, and Japanese manufacturers, Yamazaki Mazak, Mori-Seiki, Okuma, were pouring resources into CNC technology at a pace no British firm could match. They were building machines that could run complex programs with minimal operator intervention, producing parts faster and more accurately than any manually operated capstan lathe ever could. The economics were devastating. A CNC machine center could do in one setup what had previously required 3 separate machines and 3 separate operators. Herbert's management believed their traditional product line could be incrementally adapted. They believed the factoring network would fill the gap for any advanced technology they did not make themselves. They were wrong on both counts. The factoring model that had made the company rich was now a strategic liability. The foreign firms whose machines Herbert had been distributing for decades no longer needed a British middleman. They were setting up their own sales operations in the UK and selling directly to the same customers Herbert had once owned. The Herbert Ingersoll venture at Daventry, which should have been the company's bridge to the future, was plagued by mismanagement, poor coordination with the Coventry parent, and financial strain. BSA sold its entire holding in Herbert in August 1971, writing off nearly £7 million. The joint venture eventually collapsed into receivership. The parent company was left with its aging Edgwick Works, a product range that increasingly belonged to the previous decade, and a global market that was moving away from it at speed. By the early 1970s, the workforce had peaked at roughly 12,000 across 9 plants stretching from Rotherham to Falmouth. Those numbers masked the reality. Losses were mounting. The oil crisis, rampant inflation, and industrial disputes battered the remnants of the British manufacturing base. Herbert, once the undisputed leader of British machine tools, was in critical condition. The financial collapse was staggering. A decade earlier, the company's stock market valuation had sat at approximately £43 million. By 1975, it had cratered to around 800,000. Shares traded at 4 3/4 pence. On the 9th of July, 1975, the Secretary of State for Industry, Eric Varley, stood in the House of Commons and announced that the government would inject up to £25 million of public money into Alfred Herbert, primarily as equity through the newly formed National Enterprise Board. The firm was effectively nationalized. It was renamed Herbert Ltd. The company still employed roughly 6,000 people. The parliamentary debate that followed was brutal. Michael Heseltine called the case for spending public money on the company one of the most inadequate he had ever heard. Varley, pressed on the decision, admitted something remarkable. His own Industrial Development Advisory Board, the government's expert panel on these matters, had recommended letting the firm go into receivership. Varley had overruled them. He believed the social cost of losing thousands of jobs in Coventry outweighed the economic logic of letting an obsolete firm die. It did not matter. The money could not fix what was broken. You cannot buy your way out of technological obsolescence. The CNC revolution was not approaching. It had already arrived. Japanese imports were cheaper, faster, and more precise than anything Herbert could offer. The company continued to lose money year after year. In 1980, the National Enterprise Board refused further funding. The High Technology Division was sold to GEC. The rump business was acquired by Tooling Investments, which itself went into receivership in 1982. Tube Investments purchased what remained. The company closed in 1983 with debts of approximately £17 million. The entire contents of the Edgwick Works were sold in a 5-day auction held in Bay 26 of the factory. The machines, the tooling, the fixtures, the furniture, decades of accumulated capability, all of it went under the hammer. The auction raised about £750,000. Then, the wrecking crews arrived. Every foundry, every machine hall, every office building was demolished. The site was cleared and eventually redeveloped as the Gallagher Retail Park. There is nothing left of what was once the largest machine tool factory in Europe. But not everything that Alfred Herbert created disappeared. The Atrador division was incorporated as its own company in February 1980 and survived the parent's collapse entirely. Atrador Ltd still operates in Coventry today, still building drying, milling, and classification equipment, still running a foundry and machine shop. The Coventry self-opening die head remains in production under different ownership. Lady Herbert's garden still stands around the medieval city walls, the bronze gates still carrying Florence's initials, still open to the public. And the Herbert Art Gallery and Museum, now called simply the Herbert, draws hundreds of thousands of visitors each year to a building that exists because one man wrote a check for it, twice. Sir Alfred Herbert built a company that armed a nation, employed a city, and defined an industry for the better part of a century. He did it through mechanical intuition, relentless quality control, and an absolute refusal to let anyone tell him how to run his factory. But the empire he built was an extension of the man himself. When he died, so did the instinct that had kept it ahead. The company that could build the finest capstan lathes in the world could not build the future that replaced them. The machines survived. The factory did not. If this is the kind of story you watch Trade Archive for, the next one picks up where industrial empires like this always end, with the companies that saw what Herbert's board refused to see and bet everything on it. Click it now.